Today, we're getting into something pretty significant in the world of, well, digital privacy. We're talking about that huge fine the EU just hit TikTok with.
Yeah, it's definitely more than just another tech headline. This feels like a key moment for understanding how our data gets handled, especially across borders.
Absolutely. And, what kind of power regulators actually have.
Right. So for this deep dive, we're mostly looking at a news report from May 2nd, 2025. It's titled, TikTok fined 530 million ballas for breaking EU data rules.
Ah,
Our plan is to unpack that massive number, $530 million, figure out exactly what the EU says TikTok did wrong.
why you should care about it.
Exactly. Why it matters for you as a user, potentially anywhere, not just Europe, and sort of the bigger picture implications.
Okay, let's start with that headline number, 530 million. I mean, wow, that's serious. And it's Ireland's Data Protection Commission, the DPC, that issued it.
That's right, the DPC. And the core problem, according to the report, was TikTok failing to properly protect the personal data of its European users. Specifically, the issue was transferring that data to China without ensuring it had the same level of protection it gets under EU law.
Hmm. So it's not just about where the servers are, but the legal rules around accessing the data.
Precisely. It highlights this tension, right? You might think your data is safe in one place, but if it's accessible from another country with different laws, well, that changes things.
Got it. So the report mentioned two big GDPR violations, the General Data Protection Regulation. Can we break those down?
Sure. The first one is what they call illegal data transfers. Basically, moving EU user data to China without proving it would be just as safe there as required by the GDPR.
Okay, that seems clear enough. And the second?
The second is a lack of transparency, which means essentially TikTok wasn't being clear enough with users about how their data was being handled, collected, sent, processed, the whole journey.
Right. So users were kind of left in the dark about where their info was actually going.
That seems to be the finding, yeah.
And besides the fine itself, did the DPC demand anything else from TikTok?
Oh, yes. It wasn't just the money. They've ordered TikTok to fix these problems within 6 months. And crucially, they have to stop transferring European user data to China during that period.
6 months to fix it and stop the transfers in the meantime? That's quite an order.
It is. Presumably, they need to pause until
Yeah.
they can show, concrete proof that the data will be properly protected if or when transfers resume.
Now, the article mentioned this investigation wasn't new. It kicked off back in 2021. What first raised the red flags for the DPC?
Yeah, it started in 2021. There was growing unease, generally, about TikTok's data practices.
Yeah.
The DPC's findings pointed to a couple of key things. One was that TikTok hadn't properly assessed whether Chinese laws might allow authorities access to European data.
Ah, so they hadn't done their homework on the potential risks involved with storing data accessible from China.
That seems to be the regulator's conclusion, yes. It wasn't just theoretical worry.
Okay, that makes sense. What else did the investigation turn up? Anything surprising?
Well, it's interesting. The report says TikTok initially told the DPC something that wasn't quite right. They first claimed they didn't store European user data in China,
Ooh.
but they did. Later, they had to admit that, well, some data was stored there. They apparently put it down to an oversight, a mistake.
A mistake involving potentially millions of users' data.
Exactly. And while TikTok says that data's been deleted now, the report notes that regulators are still considering if more action is needed because of that initial, let's say, inaccuracy.
So looking at it from the DPC side, it sounds like a mix of maybe not checking risks properly, not being upfront with users, and maybe even giving regulators incorrect info at first. How did TikTok respond to all this? I mean, 530 million isn't pocket change.
No, definitely not. The report quotes their European policy head, Christine Gran. Her argument, essentially, is that the fine doesn't really acknowledge the steps TikTok has already taken to improve data security. She specifically mentioned something called Project Clover.
Project Clover. Okay, I think I've heard of that. What's the gist of that initiative? Is it supposed to fix these kinds of problems?
The report doesn't go super deep into Project Clover's mechanics, but yes, the implication from Gran's statement is that it's their big plan to provide better data protection for EU users. She also made a point of saying very clearly that TikTok has never given European user data to Chinese authorities.
Right. So they're pushing back, saying, look at what we're doing now with Project Clover, and denying they've ever handed data over.
Pretty much. But obviously, the size of the fine suggests the DPC wasn't fully convinced that Project Clover, at least at this stage, resolved the past issues they investigated.
Yeah, there seems to be a gap between their review and the regulators. And as the article points out, this isn't exactly TikTok's first rodeo with GDPR fines in the EU, is it?
No, not at all. You might remember back in 2023, they got hit with the 345 million fine. That one was about how they handled children's data.
Ah, yes, I remember that now.
So this latest fine, even bigger, really does feel like a strong message. It shows EU regulators are watching closely, and they aren't afraid to use the enforcement powers GDPR gives them.
It definitely sends a signal to other big tech companies too, I imagine.
Absolutely.
So let's bring this back to the listener. Why should you care about this specific TikTok fine? What are the broader takeaways here?
Well, it's about more than just TikTok. This case really gets into these fundamental debates about uh, data sovereignty.
Data sovereignty, like a country's right to control data within its borders.
Exactly. And how does that work when data flows globally, crossing into places with totally different legal setups? It gets complicated fast. It also throws a spotlight on that constant balancing act we all navigate, the convenience of these amazing apps versus our basic right to privacy and knowing our data is safe.
It really does make you pause and think about all the apps and services you use daily. Where's my data going? Who might be able to access it?
For sure. And the article even briefly mentions other cyber news CISA alerts, router issues, vulnerabilities, Google delaying the cookie phase out.
Right, just sort of setting the scene.
Yeah, it paints a picture of this constantly shifting digital world where security and privacy are ongoing battles.
Yeah.
This TikTok situation is just one very visible part of that much larger landscape.
A very expensive part in this case. It feels like a real-world example of these complex international data flow problems we talk about.
Totally. We use global platforms, but the rules aren't global. That's the core tension.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, let's nail down the main points. What are the absolute key takeaways from this TikTok fine?
Okay, the big ones. First, TikTok got fined a massive 530 million by the EU. Why? For sending European user data to China without the right legal protections in place, violating GDPR, and also for not being transparent with users about it.
Right. Safeguards and transparency were the key failings.
Exactly. Second key takeaway. This shows the EU is serious about enforcing GDPR. They're actively protecting citizen data. And third, it puts huge pressure on global tech firms. They need to be really clear, really responsible about how they handle our data, especially when it crosses borders and different legal systems.
It's a clear warning shot.
No doubt.
And this whole thing leaves us with a pretty big question, doesn't it? For all of us using these platforms. With data flying around the world, subject to all these different laws, what's our responsibility as users? How much do we need to understand about where our data goes?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Or maybe the 530 million question in this case.
Yeah. What should you be asking about the apps you use every day? Definitely something to think about. Thanks for digging into this with us today.